Yum, yum!
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Modo with Ellery. And in this episode, we're going to be continuing with our Adobe Fuse character from the previous episode, which if you missed, go ahead and check out episode 28. And we're going to take this character now, and where we've already got the textures and materials pretty much set up, we're going to expand to look at how we can improve the model in order to get a higher fidelity character for our rendering. But before we jump right into the model itself, there is one thing that I would like to show in the texture area here, and this is going to have to do with the hair. Now, in some of the previous iterations of Modo, I don't know if this is an internal change or something, the way that we had set up the hair had worked perfectly fine, where we make essentially an air material, and we put that underneath our material for the hair, and then we use the group mask with the opacity mask, and that gets rid of the hair entirely. But I've noticed in the last couple of builds here that is not quite working properly. So if you look here, you can see that the hair has some thinner areas here as it falls over the face, but the shadow is totally solid. And that's because we're not getting complete transparency out of our underlying material layer, even though we have it set to 0 diffuse, 0 reflection, 100% transparency. All that stuff is not quite working properly. But there is a really quick way around this, and what I'm going to do is just add in a processing layer and put in a constant. That's going to just put a single constant here, which I'm going to drag just above our base or our air material for the hair, and we're going to change that from a diffuse color to, under Special Effects, Stencil. And what that will do is it now will completely knock out the hair where that opacity mask for the group mask is, showing transparency. So if we go ahead and we update our render, and you can see it right here pretty obviously over the area of the cheek right underneath the eye. Now we can actually start to see some of the more individual hairs. And this is also really important with the eyelashes. So if we go down to the eyelash material here, you can see that I actually already have that in place on this character. So I already put it in there, and now we have everything pretty much working the way we would expect. So if I go over to my global illumination and turn on environment importance sampling so that we get a little bit more high fidelity shading out of our HDR, now we can definitely see the individual strands of hair kind of coming through there. All right, so with that, we're going to hop into the actual creation of some more high fidelity model for this, and we're going to use subdivision surfaces. But since we're working on a low poly model, that can occasionally cause some issues, and we're going to look how we can take those into account. And this will not only work well with characters, but this works well with any kind of low poly object that you want to bring up to subdivision surface level without having to go in and add a whole bunch of extra polygonal support to it. And this also works pretty well with a lot of kind of a mid to lower weight CAD models that may have a lot of faceting, and then you can use this in order to get something that's better quality, again, without having to go in and make a bunch of edits to the actual geometry of the model. And we're also going to add a little bit more enhanced eyes here. Since these are very simple eyes, we're going to look at cleaning those up as well. And there are a few different things that will be going on kind of with everything. So we're going to try and get all of that here into a single episode. So let's hop over to the Model tab. And we're going to start with the hair. Now, the hair is a pretty simple object for the most part because it is almost 100% consisting of these polygon strips. All right, so these individual polygon strips have the hair material on them, and that's just what's making up the hair. So these are going to be fairly simple. So if we just go ahead and press Shift-Tab, that will take us into SubD mode. And with the Catmull-Clark subdivisions on, by default, you should have a setting here, if we go down to the surface, of crease all for the boundary rules. And that's going to still give us the nice kind of hard corners for the edges of the hair, which will allow it to line up properly with the UV map. And with that, really, you're just about done with the hair. Now, you may want to go in and add some extra detail in here to something like this hairband. And so we're going to do this here, and this is actually what we're going to do across the entire model, is we're just going to harden up a few edges. And in this case, I don't really have too much to worry about here. I'm just going to set my weight to 10. And then go ahead and click, and you can see it makes it semi-hard. Now, if you've watched other videos on subdivision surfaces, you may remember that dealing with Catmull-Clark subdivision surfaces, your sharpness level for your edge weighting is a multiple of your subdivision level. So at a subdivision level of 2, 20% would give you a completely sharp edge. 10% in this case is going to give us a semi-sharp edge. Now, the issue that we have with these is that if you go anywhere closer than about 10% below the completely sharp edge, so in this case 20% is going to be completely sharp. So if we increase this to something like 15, you can often get some real weird issues with the way that this stretches. Now on this hairband back here, it's not super noticeable, but if we go all the way up to 20 or above in this case, you'll see it gets completely sharp, and that works. Now I don't want this to be completely sharp, I want it to be just a little bit more full than it was, so I'm going to put it down to 10%. Now, using this rule of the 10% rule, so 10% times the subdivision level, you can pretty easily go in and get some extra detail. So let's have a look here at the shirt is a good example. So let's hop over to the shirt. We're going to go over to Edges, Shift-Tab to put it into Subdivision Surfaces, and you can see we have these kind of sets of wrinkles in the fabric. So I'm going to add, again, that 10% subdivision onto here. You can see it gives a little bit more of a peak. Now, you may want to toy between kind of 10 and 20%, but if that doesn't give you the kind of fidelity that you need, you may want to increase your subdivision level. Then you can use percentages of weight that are more fine-tuned than simply going, 0, 10, or 20. If you put the subdivision level up to 4, then you could do 10, 20, 30, 40, and you get much more variation in the amount of sharpness that you need. Now, in this case, this is just some extra kind of profile details on the shirt, so I don't feel like we need a whole lot of extra work going on here, but I do want to kind of see the accentuation of some of these details. And it also makes a bit of a difference here around the ends of the sleeves. So if I put a subdivision weight on this sleeve, you can see it pulls it out, and then I'm just going to use my left arrow in this case to go a couple of edges over and add that on there. You can see that that is giving me a better sleeve there. Now I can back out here, and I may need to put it on a few different areas, but just by using the left and right arrows when I have a loop selected, I can leave my weight tool active, and then I can just go in and very easily just click as I get to the right edge and add that weight on. And you can see that causes some difference, some difficulties here where we've got the low poly next to the high poly, which is all right because we're going to move on to the body next. So again, I'm going to select it, Shift Tab. Let's go back over to Edge mode. And for the most part here, around the arms and the hands, we're not going to see too much difficulty with these, but where we may want to add in a little bit of extra weight is going to be in here around the eyes. So if we zoom in here, you can look and see that we've got these eyes that are now kind of getting a little bit roundy, and they're pulling away from the eyelashes. Now this is a good area where you may want to increase the subdivision level of the object as a whole, but for now I'm just going to go to 10% and add in a little bit of extra weight here just to kind of clean this up so that we can see that we get a little bit more of a ridge there at the eyes. Okay, and let's do that same thing on the other side. Shift W, click, and then the same thing up here. And you want to make sure that you're not selecting an edge loop that goes way off into some odd part of the character that you don't want to sharpen, so we're just going to add those in there. You can see it's a very subtle detail, but it will really help if you do want to get in closer on the character. Now granted, the detail level of the texture map on this character is not so high that we'd want to get in really close like this, but it's actually very easy to go in and use this existing map as a base and take some photographic, much higher resolution detail photos and go in and map those in using these as a guide, and then you could get something that you could zoom way in on, and you would want to have a higher resolution mesh to go along with those higher resolution textures. All right, so that's working pretty well, and really you can go along and make these same kind of changes all throughout. So Shift Tab, we'll see a bigger difference here on the boots than we did on the pants. The pants I'm just going to leave as is. I am going to subdivide them so that if we animate the character we get better bends and we don't see that faceted stretching. But here on the boots we definitely see some issues with this, where we've got these loops right here and right here that really should be sharper than they are. They're looking far too worn down. So let's go ahead and convert those to boundary and click, and we can set those at 10. These might be ones that we'd want to set all the way up to 20%, and that may work. I think I'm actually going to back it off though and just go to 10%. And now let's go ahead and add in a few extra little spots here where this is going to help. And then also back around the heels where these are looking really roundy and not quite what we would want here. So let's get this part, and this part. Now on the heels we end up with a little bit of a more difficult time because there's more that we have to select because it's not quite a closed loop. So we got to make sure that we get all the parts of the heel, and I'm going to include also this part just up from the heel here. So now that I've got all those selected, again, Shift W, click, and we may want to add in, you know, any of these spots that we feel like you need a little bit more rigidity to solidify these a bit. And when we're using 10% or the semi-sharp weight, that should allow you to have a pretty decent look, and you're not going to get any kind of pulling apart on the model, and it should come across looking pretty good. Now we may want to add it up here. Can always select the areas and check and see if it makes a difference, and if it doesn't, you can always just remove the weight. I think that works pretty well. Now the gloves are going to be another area where we're going to get a little bit more difficulty here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my symmetry on, Shift Tab, and we're going to look here at just one of these hands, and you can see if we look in the top view pretty well that we have kind of these faceted ends where it just ends in triangles all underneath the bottom side here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and select just all of the polygons on the front caps of these fingers, and I can deselect any extra things that got selected there. That's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to hold Control to select my boundary. Again, Shift W with the weight. And we want to make sure that these line up pretty well so that they surround the fingers. Now, you'll notice here, once we've made these changes to subdivision surfaces, you may get some, minor errors in your meshes where it starts to pull away from the character a little bit. So you may need to go ahead and just make a few little tweaks. Like I'm going to adjust these fingers just a little bit here. And you'll notice that your transform tools are going to be a little bit offset, and that just has to do with the fact that this is a character that is attached to a skeletal rig, and it doesn't make too much of a difference when we're editing things like this, but when we get into the eyes in a moment, there are going to be some things that we'll need to do, so we'll check that out here in a moment. So I'm just going to flip through here really quickly, just take and make slight adjustments to our fingers so that these come out nice, and you can make kind of any little adjustments that you see fit here just to make these work. And there are a few little edges down here that I think just also need to be pulled down just a little bit so that the fingers are fully inside of the glove. And maybe this one's going to be a polygon. We'll just pull that over, and just by going through and making some minor adjustments, you can then clean these meshes up so that they subdivide relatively well. Now, if you get areas where you get some odd puckering or anything like that with your weight map, what you can do is go in and actually use that full weight, so in this case 20% weight, and that will help you to clean up areas like that, and really should make a nice difference overall to the look of the character. Alright, so there you can see that the hand now looks a lot better. We do have some areas around the back of the glove. Now I'm not going to do all of these on camera just because it gets a bit repetitive and we don't need to cover all of that one piece at a time here. But the base idea is that if you just take entire sections here, and let me switch around to polygon mode so I get the back end here. And if you go and you just select just the areas where you have kind of unforeseen rounding, where you get stuff that doesn't look right being round, then you can go in, select those areas, clean stuff up, and pretty easily have a nice looking finished piece here. So let me just deselect that one there, hold Control to get the boundary, Shift W and click on that, and you see it starts to solidify and look a lot better. So you can go through your character that way pretty easily and get that done, and then you have something that will move and subdivide nicely, will bend better when you're working with any kind of animation, and overall is going to work pretty well. Now we come to the eyes, and the eyes are going to be a bit of a more difficult process. And the reason for that is that the eyes that come in characters like this are fairly basic, where it's just a set of polygons and that's it. So it kind of flattens off at the front, and that's really all you get. So if you wanted to do a close-up on the eyes, you're really kind of left stuck without having a whole lot of a whole lot to work with, because this isn't going to look like a realistic eye, you know, if you get anywhere closer than about here, right? So once you zoom in a little bit, you notice that this is a very basic eye. It doesn't have the two layers that a normal eye would, where you have a lens in the outer part of an eye, and then you have the inner part of the eye where the iris and the pupil are. So what we're going to do is make a few adjustments to this, but this is where working on the model this way is going to become quite difficult. You can see as I select these pieces here and I go to move them, you know, this being offset is a bit of a problem. Now this is also going to come into play when we want to duplicate this eye to create the outer portion of the eye. And that's because if we copy and paste these polygons, you notice that they are pasted out of place. All right, so instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to hop over to our Setup tab. We're going to enter Setup mode, and now we're going to work on this in Setup mode. And if we're working in Setup mode, this will allow us to much more easily adapt and change this character, because any changes that we make now are going to attach directly to the posed figure that is attached to the skeleton. All right, so what we're going to do here very first, before we do anything else, is I'm going to take these eyes as they are, and I'm going to copy them. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to make this that we've copied is going to end up being the outer shell, and we'll make some little adjustments to it. Now I'm going to go in, and what I want to do here is create kind of a little bit more of a complex internal eye, and that's going to mean that this iris is going to be inset just a little bit, and then it also means that we're going to have a pupil that indents just a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is select the entire area around the pupil, and now I'm going to hold Control and click on the edges to select the border, and now I'm going to bevel this edge here just until I get one ring that is right at the edge of the pupil and another one that is right nearby. So something like that. And then we're going to go back to our regular polygon mode. So just pressing the space bar. And then we're going to bevel. We're going to pull this back in just a little bit and shrink it down. And you may notice that as you do this, depending on how you've set this up, you may or may not get the black for the pupil quite lining up. So what you can do is you can hop very quickly over to the UV Edit tab. And in this case, I'm just going to go in and make some very minor edits to this UV. So we're going to go ahead again, and I'm going to start just on one side and do this one side at a time. I'm going to select this one, UV maps, and I'm going to go to the proper UV map here, and we're going to set our backdrop to the diffuse, which has the eyes in it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift up arrow, just one, and I'm going to scale this down just a little bit in UV space. And by scaling it down in UV space, you'll see that it's pulling the pupil outward just a little bit. And I think that works pretty well. So that works pretty well there. Let's go do the same thing on the other eye. So again, we'll select all of this, shift up arrow, scale tool. We're going to just pull this down just where it fits all into that iris area. Then shift down arrow. And now I'm going to go ahead and add both of these pieces together, and I'm going to add one more bevel just so that we don't get that odd, bad subdivision surface kind of artifacts there. All right, so that is going to work significantly better for us. And actually, what we could do further is just shift up arrow until we get to here, and then I could use the move tool to just pull this whole part back, and this is going to pull back the iris along with it. So there we go. So now I can go ahead and hop back over to the Setup tab, make sure that we are still, we're still in Setup mode, and now I'm going to paste in the original eye. And actually, sorry, I take it back. Before we do that, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to select all of these. I can use the Scale tool, and I'm going to set the Action Center to Local, and then we're just going to scale these down just a tiny bit. Let's bring up our model tab here so we can see how much we're actually scaling down. So I want to go down to something like 99 or 99.5%, so just a tiny bit so that we get a little bit of clearance now. And let's deselect that, and now we'll paste in the old eyes here. And now what we can do is I can take these, press the M key, and we'll call this eye outer. And That'll be fine like that. And then what we will do with this is, since we already have the material up, I'm going to set the diffuse amount to 0. I'm going to leave specular and Fresnel as is. I'm going to set the roughness down to 0 just for now. Now I may want to do a very low roughness along with a clear coat, but we can save that for another time. And then I'm going to set my transparent amount to 90%. And my refractive index, I'm going to use 1.33, which is water, which should give us a fairly decent refractive index for this outer portion of the eye. And now we can go in here and I'm going to select just these polygons here and the same ones on the other side. And we're just going to pull these out just a little bit. And we may need to also bevel and pull this bevel in just a little bit. And now what we're getting is this outer lens part of the eye. Now this should give us something that's pretty decent. Now we could get more complex with, making the lens actually fit directly over the iris specifically, but just by taking the center part and pulling it out and having shrunken down the interior part of the eye, we should be in pretty good shape there. All right, so now let's hop over real quickly to the render tab and get a preview of what this looks like as compared to our original version that we had here. And already right off the bat here, you can see that this is looking a lot better, but there's a little bit of an issue, and that's that we have reflection and quite a bit of reflection on the outer portion of the eye, but you also have some reflection on the inner portion of the eye, and it's kind of, causing it to get this weird kind of double reflection thing going on. So what we'll do is we'll go down to the eyes, and I'm going to go to the material itself, and I'm going to set the specular amount to 0. And the Fresnel to 0. So we're essentially removing the reflection from the inner portion of the eye so that we only get the reflection on the lens in the outer portion. And that should help us get a lot nicer look there to that. Now, if you wanted to take this up one more level, what you could easily do then is take and remap a higher resolution eye texture to these eyes. You could take and create a separate UV map for them, and that would help a lot. But, this should be a lot better in general. So let's take just a moment here. I'm going to let this refine a little bit. So now you can see we've got our subdivided hair, subdivided face, subdivided eyes, and then we have the more complex eyes on top of that. So we'll look at this and we'll see that this is going to be, in some ways a very subtle difference, but as you get in closer to the character and as you look at any of the kind of detail, extra edges to the character around the hair and things like that, it will be a very pronounced difference that will allow you to really make this character look a lot better. And should you choose to go in and update the textures with higher resolution photographs to place on top of the existing texture, you can end up with something that looks much better all the way around. And there you go. Now you can see that we've got this looking much better. We have our hair refined with the better transparency map. The eyes are looking much more lively now. And like I said, you could really easily go in and add a little bit of blurred reflection with some clear coat on top that would give you a little bit more kind of depth, a little bit of mistiness perhaps to the reflection on the eyes, which could look nice. But there you go. You have something that is now going to hold up much better for closer detail renders and is also going to work better when you go on to animate your character. So if you like this video and videos like it, please feel free to follow and subscribe on the YouTube channel. You can also follow along at patreon.com/Ellery, where subscribers can get downloadable versions of not just the videos, but also of the content files as well, so you can work right along with me. If you'd like to get this episode or any other episode of Modo with Ellery a la carte, you can get individual episodes or packs of episodes at Gumroad, and that's gumroad.com/Ellery. So that does it for this one. Now go make something cool, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yum, yum!